This is Rise and Fall Football Stories. They called him Captain America, not because he asked for it, but because the United States needed someone to carry that name. Christian Pulisic was supposed to be different, the player who could finally bridge the gap, the one who could take American soccer from promising to real. And for a moment, it felt like he would. The goals, the headlines, the belief, everything started to build around him faster than anyone expected. But that's where the story changes. Because being the most talented player isn't the same as being the one who carries everything. And at the highest level, that difference becomes heavy. Not all at once, but over time. So the question isn't just how good Pulisic is. It's whether one player was ever supposed to carry this much. And what happens when the weight doesn't lift? Before the pressure, before the expectations, there was the rise. And it happened faster than anyone expected. Christian Pulisic wasn't supposed to break through this early. For years, American players moving to Europe followed a similar path. They adapted slowly. They waited for opportunities. They proved themselves over time. But he didn't wait. At Borussia Dortmund, the environment didn't reward patience. It demanded impact. Young players were given chances, but only if they could handle the pace, the pressure, and the expectation immediately. And somehow, he did. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with a confidence that stood out. He attacked defenders without hesitation. He made decisions quickly. He played like someone who didn't see the level as something intimidating, but something natural. And that changed how people saw him. Because now, this wasn't just potential, this was production. Week after week, small moments started to add up. A dribble that broke a line, a run that opened space, a goal that felt bigger than just a goal because of what it represented. And with every moment, the narrative grew stronger. This isn't just another American player in Europe. This is something different. And that belief didn't stay contained. It crossed continents. Because back in the United States, people weren't just watching his performances. They were projecting something onto them. A future, a possibility, a version of American soccer that hadn't existed before. And that's when the rise stopped being just his. It became everyone's, and that's when everything changed. Because the moment Christian Pulisic stopped being seen as just a young talent, the expectation arrived. Not slowly, all at once. It wasn't just about what he was doing at Borussia Dortmund anymore. It became about what he represented for the United States. A player who could finally carry the game forward. A player who could turn progress into something real. And once that idea took hold, it didn't leave space for anything else. Every performance started to mean more. Every mistake started to feel bigger. Because now, people weren't watching him as a prospect. They were watching him as the answer. And that's where the wait began. Because expectation doesn't just sit on the surface. It follows you into every match, into every decision, into every moment where the game speeds up and the margin disappears. Imagine stepping onto the pitch knowing that every touch is being measured against something bigger than the moment itself. Not just whether it works, but whether it proves what everyone believes. That changes how you play, because now it's not just instinct, it's pressure, the need to justify the belief, the need to show that the rise wasn't temporary, that it leads somewhere. And that's the problem, because when expectation arrives before the story is fully built, it creates a gap, a space between what a player is becoming and what people already think he should be. And at the highest level, that gap doesn't stay hidden. It gets tested every time. And then came the move that changed everything. From Borussia Dortmund to Chelsea FC. A step that wasn't just about a bigger club, but a completely different kind of pressure. Because the Premier League doesn't wait for you. It doesn't care how promising you were before. It doesn't slow down so you can adjust. It forces you to prove yourself immediately in a system where every mistake is visible and every decision is punished if it's not sharp enough. And that's where the story becomes more complicated. At times, Christian Pulisic looked exactly like the player people believed in. Direct, explosive, capable of breaking games open in seconds. There were moments where everything clicked, where the speed, the confidence, and the instinct all aligned. You could see it. The version of him that could truly compete at the highest level, but it didn't stay consistent. Injuries interrupted the rhythm, lineups changed, managers changed, roles shifted, and suddenly, instead of building momentum, he was constantly restarting. That's the challenge of this level, because it's not just about showing what you can do once, it's about proving you can do it again and again without losing clarity. And when that consistency isn't there, the narrative starts to shift, not dramatically, but enough, from certainty to doubt. And that's where the pressure begins to feel different, because now it's not just about becoming something great, it's about proving you still can. And when everything aligns, you can still see it, the version of Christian Pulisic that everyone believed would change everything. It doesn't show up all the time, but when it does, it's undeniable. The first touch is clean, the movement is sharp, the decisions arrive without hesitation. He doesn't wait for the game to come to him, he attacks it. He forces defenders to react. He creates space where there wasn't any. That's the player, the one who can turn a quiet game into something dangerous in seconds. Imagine this moment, a tight World Cup match. Nothing is opening up. The tempo is slow, controlled, almost predictable. And then suddenly, one run breaks the line. One touch changes the angle. One decision comes faster than everyone else on the pitch. That's all it takes. Because players like this don't need dominance, they need moments. And in those moments, everything shifts. That's why the belief never fully disappears. Because people have seen it. Not just once, but enough times to know it's real. The ability to carry the game forward. To create something when nothing is there. To become the difference when the margin is gone. That's the best case version. Not perfect, but decisive. And if that version shows up at the right time, in the right moments, under the highest pressure, then the story looks very different. Not about potential, but about impact. But the problem is, that version doesn't always stay. And when it fades, the drop feels sharper than it should, because now the expectation is already there. So when Christian Pulisic doesn't take over a game, it doesn't feel neutral. It feels like something is missing. That's the pressure, because at this level, you're not judged by what you can do. You're judged by what you consistently show. And when consistency breaks, even slightly, everything starts to feel uncertain. Imagine the same match, same tension, same stakes. But this time, the touch is just a fraction off. The decision takes a second longer. The space closes before he can exploit it. Nothing dramatic, but enough. Because now the moment is gone. And at the World Cup, you don't get it back. That's how the game shifts. Not through big mistakes, through small ones. Repeated. A run that doesn't connect. A pass that invites pressure. A hesitation that gives the defender time to recover. And suddenly, instead of driving the game forward, you're reacting to it. That's the difference. Because when a player carries expectation like this, silence becomes louder than mistakes. And that's where it becomes dangerous. Because now it's not just about performance, it's about doubt. And once that enters the game, it doesn't leave easily. And this is where the story becomes heavier than football. Because Captain America was never just a nickname. It was a responsibility. One that Christian Pulisic didn't create, but had to carry anyway. Because when a country is still building its identity in the game, it looks for someone to represent it. Someone to simplify the story. Someone who can turn a team into a symbol. And for a long time, that someone was him. But that kind of role doesn't come with balance. It comes with expectation that doesn't adjust. If he plays well, it's what people expect. If he doesn't, it becomes the story. And that's the difference. Because now every performance is not just judged on its own, it's judged against what he represents. Imagine walking into every match knowing that you're not just one of the players. You're the one people are waiting for. The one they expect to change the game when it matters. The one who has to step forward when everything tightens. That changes how you carry yourself. Because now it's not just about instinct, it's about responsibility. And responsibility doesn't disappear when things aren't working. It becomes heavier. That's the burden. Because being the face of something growing is different from being part of something already established. You don't just perform, you define what people believe it can become. And beyond everything happening on the pitch, there's another layer that never really goes away: how the world sees him. Because inside the United States, Christian Pulisic represents something bigger. Progress, hope, a sign that American soccer is finally moving forward. But outside of it, the perspective is different, more neutral, more demanding. Because globally, Players aren't judged by what they represent, they're judged by what they produce. And at that level, the standard is already set. Against players from Brazil, Argentina, and France, the conversation changes. It's no longer about potential or narrative. It's about impact, about consistency, about whether you can influence games against the very best, not just in moments, but over time. That's the reality of the global stage. Because here, reputation doesn't carry you, performance does. And that's where the gap becomes visible. Not because he isn't talented enough, but because the margin at this level is so small that every inconsistency stands out. Every quiet game feels louder, every missed moment becomes part of the story, and once that narrative forms, it spreads quickly. Because the world doesn't wait to decide, it reacts, and that reaction shapes how a player is seen, not just in one tournament, but in the story that follows. And after everything, the rise, the expectation, the flashes of brilliance, the moments of doubt, it all comes down to one question. Not how talented Christian Pulisic is, that part is already clear, but whether he can carry the moment when it actually matters. Because this isn't about highlights, it's about timing. Imagine the game is level, the margin is gone, the crowd is loud, but the space on the pitch feels smaller with every second. This is where everything tightens. This is where the game stops being open and starts becoming decisive. And in that moment, the ball finds him, not by accident, because players like him are expected to be there. This is where the story is decided. One touch, one movement, one decision that either breaks the game open or lets it pass. And there's no time to think about the past, no space to rely on reputation, no room for hesitation, just the moment. That's what defines players at this level, not what they can do across a season, but what they do when everything is reduced to seconds. Because talent brings you into these moments, but it doesn't guarantee you survive them. And for him, for everything he represents, for everything that has been built around his name, that's the question that still hasn't been fully answered. And maybe that's why this story never feels simple. Because with Christian Pulisic, it's never just about how good he is. That part is clear. He has the talent. He has the moments. He has already shown enough for people to believe that he can be the difference when everything is on the line. But belief isn't the same as proof. And at the highest level, proof is the only thing that lasts. Because the World Cup doesn't remember potential, it remembers moments. The ones that hold and the ones that don't. And that's what makes this so difficult to define. Because this could still go in both directions. It could become the story of a player who carried the weight and delivered when it mattered most. The one who turned expectation into reality. The one who proved that everything built around him wasn't too much. It was exactly what he needed. Or it could become something else. A story of flashes instead of control, of moments instead of consistency, of a player who had everything to be that figure, but never fully became it when the stage demanded more. And that's the truth. Because this isn't just about whether he succeeds. It's about how he's remembered. Be honest. Is he still the one who can carry this team? Or are we expecting something that was never meant to be carried alone?